I mean, Nettie is such a loser. It is kinda weird, Aileen agreed, frowning as she switched her sleeping bag to the other arm. We've never had anything to do with her in our lives, and suddenly old nerdy Nettie goes and invites us to a sleepover? Susie giggled under her breath and strolled ahead up the walk, leading the others as usual. Come on, you two, she commanded. It doesn't matter whose idea it was. This will be educational. You'll see. All we're doing is spending an evening here so we can learn how geeks live their lives. Okay, well, when you put it that way, Audrey said, a nasty smile slowly returning to her face. I guess it will be pretty entertaining at that. Without further delay, all three girls reached forward and knocked on the door. The door swung open. A girl their own age stood awkwardly before them. She wore thick glasses and a long polka dot dress. Hi, Nettie, the girls gushed, as if she were their best friend. Don't you look great in that spotty dress, Audrey added with false enthusiasm. Thanks, Annette said shyly. She did not make eye contact with any of them. Come on in and meet my parents. Annette stiffly turned around. When they were sure she wasn't looking, the three girls rolled their eyes at each other, then followed their hostess inside. Behind the door was a small living room filled with bookcases and old chairs and end tables. Two middle-aged adults rose from a huge orange sofa. These are my parents, Annette said in a choked voice. Mom and Dad, this is Audrey, Aline, and Susie. Annette's father was tall and handsome, and he bowed and took off an old-fashioned felt hat. It's wonderful to meet you, he said politely. We've heard so much about you. Annette's mom, also good-looking, glided from one girl to another, formally shaking their hands. Two gold bracelets jingled on one of her forearms with a ching-ching sound. We're so glad you could come to Annette's little party, she said. Oh, Susie said, putting her hand on her chest dramatically. We wouldn't have missed this for the world. Annette's dad replaced his hat and gestured toward the dining table, on which sat chilled soda bottles and glasses. Steam curled from a white cardboard of a pair of pizza boxes. Here's dinner, he said. I hope you like pizza. The woman moved to stand next to her husband. Well, good night. We'll let you kids enjoy yourselves, she said with a smile. Annette, don't forget to lock up at the end of the evening, her dad said. Annette nodded. Then the man turned to the girls again. And thank you so much for accepting our daughter's invitation. He tipped his hat once more. His wife bowed, and both of them exited through the tall hall doors, shutting them behind them. For several minutes after their departure, there was silence in the room. Annette stood by the dining table, her arms crossed over her chest, lips trembling slightly. The girls stood around her like wolves circling a lamb. Finally, after she was sure the adults were gone, Susie uttered a little chuckle. So those are the people who adopted you, huh? She hissed. Now be honest with us, Nettie. How long did it take you to teach them to greet us? What do you mean? Annette responded, her face blank. Oh, you know, Aileen joined in. She snatched a small pillow off the orange sofa and placed it on her head like a hat. It was so nice of you to come, she said in a whiny, mocking tone, lifting the pillow as if she were tipping a hat. Oh, I'm so pleased to meet you. Audrey smirked at one of her two friends. Well, at least we learned something interesting. Nettie's parents are just as geeky as she is. Annette turned to the table as the three guests dissolved into helpless laughter. Should we have some pizza before it gets cold? She asked in a desperate attempt to change the subject. Susie strutted over and flung open the lids on the boxes. What is this? Pineapple? She wrinkled her nose in distaste. Who in their right mind would want to eat that on their pizza? Annette shook her head. I'm sorry, she said. We just thought... Well, you should have just asked us first, shouldn't you have? Susie scolded. Aileen moved to stand over the pizza boxes, where she plucked pieces of fruit off the pizza, flinging them carelessly onto the table. When she was done, the three friends all took slices of pizza from the box. We only eat cheese pizza, Susie mumbled through a full mouth. Remember that for next time. Sighing, Annette sat down on a chair watching while the three girls wolfed down the pizza. When they finished, she cleared her throat and brought out a box that had been sitting under her chair. Would you all like to play some games now? She asked quietly. We have Chinese checkers, chess, and all kinds of card games. I don't think so, Susie snapped back. I think what we'd mainly like to do is just talk. Wouldn't we, girls? She smiled at the others, who grinned back and pulled their chairs up around Annette. Yeah, agreed Audrey. Let's just get to know each other better. And so, for the next couple of hours, Annette stayed rooted to her chair, her face cast down, while the other girls took turns insulting her, each one crueler than the last. Those are real cool games you have there, Nettie. Checkers, chess, and cards. How original. So, where did you get that awful dress anyway? Who decorated this awful house? Pigs from a local barnyard? Do you ever wonder how come no one likes to sit next to you at school? Annette gave one-word answers to their questions. Sometimes she shrugged, and sometimes she just tried to ignore them. All the while, she cast frequent glances at the mantel clock. When it was finally midnight, she slowly rose from her chair with a tired but relieved expression on her face. Hey, I've got one more question, Susie said. Your parents said they'd heard a lot about us. Just what kind of stuff did you tell them anyway? Did you make up a bunch of lies about the things we all do together and the places we like to go? Aileen prompted. I'll bet you said what great friends we were, right? Audrey added, playing with her hair again. You probably went on and on about how cool and considerate we are and how much you like us and how much our friendship means to you. Annette cleared her throat and sighed. Actually, I told them you're the meanest, most gossipy kids in the school and that you're incredibly stuck on yourselves, she said, pushing her glasses back up her nose with one thumb. And I made it pretty clear that I don't like any of you, but then that's exactly why I invited the three of you over here. Utter silence filled the room. The trio looked from one to the other with wide, shocked eyes. Susie, as usual, was the first one to recover. That doesn't make any sense, she protested. Why would you ask us to spend the night if you couldn't stand us? Believe me, it was only because my parents asked me to, Annette said with a sigh. She looked at her watch. Time to lock up, she murmured, and she went around securely locking the door in every door in the room. They were probably worried because you never bring any friends home, right? Sneered Audrey. Did they really think this would work? Aileen said. Did your parents really believe they could buy our friendship with some pizza and an invitation to stay in your dump of a house? Annette, who was finished with the locks, faced them squarely. Not even close, she said wistfully, looking out the window as a stray moonbeam lit her face. It really didn't have anything to do with me. My parents were just hungry. That's all. Hungry? Said Susie. She made a face to the others and twirled her finger at her temple. That's a pretty weird comment, even for you, nerdy Nettie. What in the world are you babbling about? Audrey, who had wandered off to the side of the room, craned her head this way and that as she studied one of the doors. Hey, she finally said, tugging on the doorknob, the sarcasm gone and her voice sounding alarmed. Why are these doors all locked, Annette? What's going on? Why did you shut the doors? So you can't get out, Annette answered calmly, and with that, she turned around and opened the hall doors. The wolf-like creatures on the other side stood there on their hind legs, glowering at the girls with sharp, yellow eyes. One of them wore an old-fashioned felt hat. The animal thing was so tall that the hat almost brushed against the ceiling. The other had 2 gold bracelets encircling a hairy forepaw. The bracelets rang together with a ching, ching as both creatures dropped to all fours. Sorry I left out one little detail when I told you I was adopted, Annette said with a sly grin. I was adopted by werewolves. With ferocious, mad dog growls, Annette's parents bounded into the room after the screaming girls. Not bad, not bad, especially not for, Scary Stories number 8. I mean, we're pretty deep in the Scary Stories for Sleepovers lore, so not bad. Let's see what you guys are saying. Our first story for the night. And we're almost done with Scary Stories for Sleepovers number 8, and then I'm going to open another random package to find out what Scary Stories book we're going to read next, because I ordered all of them, and when they arrived, I didn't open them. So let's see what you guys are saying in the chat. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Ray Cersei, oh, more bullies, not cool. You know, that's one big thing about these Scary Stories for Sleepovers books. A lot of them are about kids being real buttheads and then getting more than they bargained for. Let's see, Ray Cersei, oh, these girls are not nice. Geeks are cool. Geeks are cool and we rule the world. Jason P. Weinroom said, yummy cheese pizza. Morgan Moore said, these girls are not fetch to their host. Morgan, stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen. Shane Migliavacca said, pineapple pizza is awesome. He is correct. Michelle said, pineapple does belong on pizza. Also correct. Ray Cersei said, I'll also take the pineapple pizza. Yes, we got a room with some serious pizza lover. Where is Henrik where it's dark and the sun's still out? That's none of your business, Jamar. That's none of your business. Shane Migliavacca said, I can't say that on the show. David Neuer said, can't wait for these kids to die. Ray Cersei, should have eaten the pineapple girls. Morgan Moore said, I have a feeling the parents will eat the kids. Well, you were not wrong. These girls really had it coming is what Shane said. And, kids be dead, yo. That's a very Midwestern response, Ray. And Shane Migliavacca, yay werewolves. Yes, indeed, yay werewolves. Dwayne Wett said, hey, friend, here for my hump day spooky. Happy to provide, my friend. So I'll start another story here in a minute. We've got plenty of stories to read. And I just want to mention again, tipping is not required, but it is appreciated. So thank you so much, anybody who drops a tip into PayPal or Venmo. And I also want to say that I lost the chat room for a second. I also want to say that the best thing you can do is just hit the little share button and tell people you're enjoying listening to some scary stories and you want them to join us, because we all might have a smidge of cabin fever. You never know. That's good. Oh, thank you, Shane Migliavacca, for your generous tip. I really appreciate it, my man. Thank you very much. I know I try not to get like overly sentimental, but no joke, been basically out of work for 6-7 weeks now, and your guys' tips have actually bought me groceries and dog food, and I really appreciate it. It's only made this even more fun to have something to look forward to every Wednesday night, and I intend to do it past quarantine, at least sporadically, do a couple weeks here, a couple weeks there, maybe a month there, a month here. But right now, most of us are still, hanging out in our homes, so I say we tell another scary story for sleepovers. Ooh, this one is holiday themed, and it's the last story of Scary Stories for Sleepovers number 8. It's called Christmas at Mountain Hollow. Timothy's father drove the car carefully over the icy road. From underneath the vehicle came the sound of the snow chains, rhythmically bumping metal with each turn of the tire. Outside, the trees, ground, and boulders were all covered in a fluffy blanket of snow. Timothy, can you believe we're actually going to have our first white Christmas? 6-year-old Nicole said happily. I know, it's going to be pretty cool, Timothy answered. He smiled, looking over at his sister, who had her face pressed against the glass, staring out in wonder at the wintry scene. He was looking forward to their holiday up in the mountains too, but he'd also been just the tiniest bit afraid as well. He looked out the window just in time to see a city limits sign with icicles dripping from its bottom edge. Mountain Hollow, population 750. Timothy shuddered at the sight. Was it possible that what he had heard about this place was true? Almost there, their father said from the front seat. Their mother turned around and gave them the thumbs up sign. I can hardly wait, she said excitedly. Me neither, squeaked Nicole. Timothy smiled at them and nodded. He wished he felt the family's enthusiasm for this particular vacation. From under the car, the snow chains continued to bump, sounding to Timothy like a cold heart beating in the forest. They pulled off the main road and reached the isolated rental cabin a few minutes later. It was a small, single-level structure made of pine that still had the bark attached. This gave it an old-fashioned look. Icicles hung from the eaves and a layer of snow covered the roof like frosting on a cake. "We're here," Timothy's father announced, pulling the car into the driveway. No sooner had he turned off the engine than the entire family flung open their doors, opened the front gate, and stamped a path through the snow to the front porch. Inside, the cabin was very inviting. Warm wood covered nearly every surface. A huge rock fireplace stood in the living room, and soon Timothy's father had a blazing fire going. After they all had unpacked their suitcases, the family relaxed on the big sofa before the crackling flames. "Did you notice?" Nicole said, pointing at the wide wooden mantel. "It's perfect for hanging our stockings. Can we put them up now, please?" Her father glanced at his watch. "It's a little late now, honey." Her mother looked at her and winked. "Christmas is the day after tomorrow," she said. "In the morning we'll all start decorating, but for tonight I think it's time to test those electric blankets in our rooms. Don't you?" Everyone nodded sleepily and trudged off to bed. Nicole, in the same room as Timothy, chattered to him about Christmas for a few minutes. Then she fell silent, and soon Timothy heard the even sound of her breathing as she slept. Timothy snuggled into his own sheets and slowly dropped to sleep. It was still dark when he awoke. He had distinctly heard the sound of something heavily walking through the snow outside. Timothy got out of bed and crept to the window, the crunching sound still vibrating in his ears. Could it be? He thought, in fear. When he swept the drapes aside, it was hard to make anything out, since the full moon was shining directly in the glass. When his eyes adjusted, he thought he saw an odd white figure moving off behind the pine trees, not 100 feet away. But it disappeared so suddenly, Timothy really couldn't be sure. He waited some time, watching the dark forest, but nothing else happened. Finally, Timothy grew chilled from standing at the icy window, and he jumped back into bed. He shivered there for a long time, both from cold and from fear. The next time Timothy awoke, it was from the pressure of a hand on his shoulder. His eyes flew open, and it was all... There we go. And it was all he could do to keep from screaming, but it was just his father, sitting on the mattress, the morning sun coloring curtains behind him golden. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you," he whispered. "It's Christmas Eve morning, and I thought we could surprise your sister and your mom by picking out our tree before they wake up." "Okay, Dad, sounds good," Timothy whispered back, feeling weak. He glanced over at Nicole, who still lay peacefully sleeping. "Dress warmly. I'll wait for you in the living room," his father said, and he left so Timothy could get ready. Outside, it was very cold. Timothy could see his breath like a cloud before his face. His father held a big axe in one mittened hand and gestured toward the forest with the other. "Now let's each look around for the perfect tree. When you see a good one, call out to me, and if we agree, we'll cut it down, okay?" Timothy looked around, blinking. "You mean we're gonna split up?" he asked, alarmed. "Sure, that way we can look at more trees," his father said cheerfully. "But don't go too far from the cabin," and with that, he walked off, swinging his axe, and was soon swallowed up by the forest. Timothy looked about. At least the sky was blue and the sun was bright. "I'll surely be safe in broad daylight, won't I?" he thought, uncertainly, trying to convince himself. Then he nervously walked off into the trees. After a while, he saw several fir trees that were very pretty, but they were either too short or too tall. Maybe the perfect one will be right around the next corner, he thought, wondering if his father was having the same kind of luck. These pages are stiff. There we go. But then Timothy made the mistake of looking down. A set of long, claw-like footprints was etched into the icy surface of the snow at his feet, and he realized he had wandered to the same section of forest where he'd seen the white shape the night before. He stared down at the prints, speechless with fear. Suddenly a shout rose from the pines over to the left. "Timothy, come over this way!" his father yelled. "I've got a great tree here!" Without thinking, Timothy bolted through the trees toward where he'd heard his father's voice. After a few feet, the ground became rough, and he had to climb over several rocks before entering the forest again. Every time he brushed past a tree, Timothy braced himself, expecting to run up against whatever it was that had made those footprints. But finally, he broke through into a little clearing where his father was proudly pointing at a tree. "Look, here's the one his father began. "Dad, we have to get out of here," Timothy interrupted, looking over his shoulder. "We're not alone in this forest." His father's smile faded from his face. "What do you mean we're not alone?" "I mean, kids from school warned me that some kind of snow beast lives in the mountain hollow," Timothy said breathlessly. "Last night, I think I saw it, and I just now found its footprints." His father sighed. "Look, I'll make a deal with you. Let's cut down this tree first. Then we'll check out those prints, all right?" Timothy agreed, and he waited, nervously looking around while his dad chopped down the fir tree. Then the two of them carried it, his father holding the big stump and Timothy the smaller end. "I think the prints are over this way," Timothy said as he tried to retrace his steps, leading back through the forest the way he'd come. But at the boulders he couldn't even see his own footprints. At last, he had to shrug. "I can't remember where I saw the prints," he admitted, "but they were here. But they were there." His father paused and looked Timothy in the eye. "Look, I believe you when you say you saw something that scared you," he said. "And I want you to come to me or your mom if you see anything else. But in the meantime, let's not mention this to your sister, okay? We don't want anything to ruin her Christmas." Timothy nodded, and the two dragged their prized tree back to the cabin. The rest of the day was spent decorating the tree in the cabin. Nicole and her mom were in charge of the tree, and they hung every one of the family ornaments, in addition to homemade popcorn strings and lights. Meanwhile, Timothy and his dad strung lights inside and outside the cabin and hung up a wreath. They took a break for lunch and later ate a big turkey dinner. Then they sang carols while Timothy and Nicole hung up their stockings on nails that their dad had drove into the mantelpiece. It was a fun day, but even so, the thought of the snow beast was there in the back of Timothy's mind. Taunting him throughout the evening, he felt he had to do something to protect his family. Earlier, he'd noticed that the long string of sleigh bells his family usually put up on the front door at home was still lying at the bottom of one of the boxes of Christmas decorations. Just before bedtime, while Nicole was setting out milk and cookies for Santa, he retrieved the sleigh bells. Then he snuck out into the dark, snow-filled yard and hung them on the front gate. The gate provided the only way into the yard, and Timothy figured that now they would at least have some kind of warning if an unexpected visitor came calling in the night. It wasn't much, but he felt better doing something rather than nothing at all. Timothy had a feeling his family was about to experience a Christmas Eve unlike any other. Late that night, Timothy felt little fingers shaking him awake. It was Nicole. A look of wonder stamped on her features. "Listen, Timothy," she whispered. "Do you hear it?" Timothy felt his eyes widening as he heard a tinkling sound from somewhere outside. All of a sudden, he realized what it was. "Sleigh bells," he muttered. "Of course, silly," Nicole whispered. "Isn't it wonderful? Santa must be here." Timothy stared at her for a second, then nodded dumbly. Well, yes," he said, not wanting to upset her. "That must be who it is." Timothy chewed on his lower lip, racking his brain for a plan. Suddenly, his stepsister crept toward the window. "Maybe we can see him from here," she whispered in an awestruck tone, reaching for the curtains. "No!" Timothy shouted. He threw himself out of bed and darted in front of Nicole to block her view. The last thing they needed was for her to start crying or yelling right now. Nicole stared at him with a hurt expression. Santa might be shy about someone seeing him," he explained haltingly. In spite of his words, Timothy could not resist pulling the curtains aside and sneaking a peek with his own out of the glass. The gate stood ajar, just as he feared. Timothy scanned the rest of the yard, and his jaw dropped open. Walking across the sidewalk toward the house was a hairy white creature nearly 8 feet tall. Evidently, it had just made a kill before entering their yard, for it carried the body of a deer on its broad shoulders. It twisted its shaggy head to take a bite of its prize, its sharp teeth tearing the raw meat as if it were paper. Stunned, Timothy looked back into the room. The streaming moonlight threw the shadow of the deer's antlered head onto the wall, and Nicole was pointing at it in glee. "I can see the shadow of a reindeer right there, Tim," she said. Then she frowned at Timothy. "How come you get to look at Santa and I don't?" she asked in a snippy tone. Timothy glanced at the yard once more, just in time to see the beast casually toss the buck off into the snow. It turned to stare up at the cabin with narrow, scowling eyes and smacked its black lips. Then, without warning, it crouched and leapt into the outside wall, scaling the roof in a few easy motions. Timothy looked back, giving Nicole his most stern expression. "Nicole, you have to stay here in the room for a minute," he spoke quickly, his words tumbling over one another. "I've got to talk to Mom and Dad, okay?" She nodded, but it was plain by her expression that she was both confused and angry over her brother's orders. Easing their bedroom door closed behind him, Timothy raced down the hall into his parents' room. "Mom, Dad," he said urgently, "you've got to get up." Moaning, his parents rolled over in their bed. What's wrong, son?" his dad asked, blinking in the gloom. He reached for a bedside light, but Timothy put his hand out to stop him. "You know that thing I told you about this morning?" he said breathlessly. "Well, it's here. I just saw it climb onto the roof. I think it's trying to find a way in." As if to punctuate his sentence, an abrupt scraping noise grated from above their heads. His parents sat up in their bed, suddenly wide awake. Then they all heard a door swing open and footsteps pounding down the hall in their direction. Nicole's face appeared at the open doorway. "Did you all hear that?" she said blissfully. "It must be Santa on the roof." In the dim moonlight creeping in through the cracks in the curtains, Timothy saw his parents exchange a look. "What should we do?" his mother whispered. Her husband shrugged. "We may have to leave," he said solemnly. "Timothy, how big was this thing you saw?" "Its head would touch the ceiling," Timothy told them. Another scraping issued from above, louder this time. Nicole ran out of the room. "Nicole!" yelled her mom. For a few seconds there was no answer. Then Nicole's voice called from the living room. "Hurry, everybody! I think he's coming down the chimney now!" Moving as one person, Timothy and his parents rushed out the door and into the front room. A clattering sound issued from the chimney. To Timothy's horror, his sister knelt on the heath with her head gazing up into the fireplace. "Santa," she cooed, "you're not really too shy to be seen, are you?" "Nicole, come here this instant!" their mother yelled. The little girl backed up and took a step toward them. The scrambling sounds intensified, followed by a clattering. Several bricks rained down into the fireplace, right on the spot where Nicole had been perched. She stared down at the damage and looked up at her family with a smirk. "I think Santa's having trouble getting down the chimney," she giggled. "Maybe we should just open the front door and let him in." Her father grabbed her hand, hustled her into the hallway, and motioned for his wife and son to follow. There was a terrified look in his eye Timothy had never seen before. "Listen, I want you three to wait down the hall out of sight of the living room. I'm just going to our bedroom for the car keys, okay?" Behind him, the crashing noises grew louder. More bricks came spilling into the living room. "But Dad," Nicole said, clearly puzzled. "Now," the father ordered, and their mother hustled the kids into the end of the hall while he darted into the bedroom. There was a final, tremendous crash from the living room. Then everything fell strangely silent. Their father reappeared after a second, clutching the keys in one hand. "What happened?" he asked, his voice a whisper. "Maybe he gave up," his wife whispered, hopefully. Or maybe, Timothy thought, he got inside. "I hope you're right," the man said to his wife, "because this hall is a dead end. We have to pass the living room to get out the front door to get to the car." Everyone listened for a few seconds, but the house was silent. "I don't understand," Nicole said in a low voice. "Why are we leaving, and where are we going?" Nicole's mother reached over and hugged her. "We'll explain everything later," she said. From the next room came the sound of breaking glass. "Okay, on the count of 3, the children's father said, his voice hoarse. "We're going to make a run for it. Hold hands and follow me. 1, 2, 3! The entire family bolted down the hall past the living room. Timothy stopped and stared at the wreckage of the fireplace, looking anxiously among the scattered bricks for a sign of the snow beast. Look at the table! Santa ate his milk and cookies!" Nicole suddenly cried. Timothy noticed a few shards of porcelain lying on the table's surface. "Shh!" their mother warned. Their father opened the front door and ushered everyone out, but it was already too late. Timothy glanced back and saw a huge, hairy head peek around the corner from the kitchen. Run! He screamed. The four of them took off, snow kicking up in clots from the slippers on their feet. Timothy's father had unlocked the car and already had the keys in the ignition before the others had reached it. The engine made a grinding noise. Was it too cold to start? Timothy wondered frantically. He looked behind him just as the snow beast flew out the front door. Timothy's mother picked Nicole up and leapt into the back seat. Meanwhile, his father turned the key again, and this time the engine caught. Timothy opened the passenger door and started to get in, but something seemed to be holding him back. He looked down. His bathrobe pocket was twisted around the door handle, keeping him in place like a dog on a leash. Timothy struggled, thrashing back and forth in an effort to free himself. Heavy footsteps crunched on the snow after him. "Hurry, Timothy," his dad yelled. He kept the car idling, waiting for his son to get in. Suddenly, the night seemed to grow darker. Timothy knew the beast was right next to him, blocking the moonlight with its huge body. Frantic at the thought, Timothy threw himself violently to one side, and the pocket of the bathrobe ripped off entirely. He was free. "Go, Dad!" he yelled as he leapt into the front passenger seat. His father hit the gas and the car began to lurch away. But Timothy could not shut his door. The snow beast held onto it with one powerful hand and was running alongside the car, its snarling face lunging through the door opening at Timothy. It opened its fanged mouth, preparing to bite him. His mother screamed from the back seat. Nicole, sheltered from the awful sight by her mother's arms, yelled, "Let me go! What's happening?" The car gained speed, but the beast kept pace with the car, still holding the door open. Its drooling mouth moved in toward Timothy. His father, careful not to slow the car down, suddenly lunged for the door handle and tugged the door out of the beast's grasp. The door glanced off the creature's snapping jaws, pinching its face as it closed. Then Timothy's dad jammed the gas pedal to the floor. Pinwheels of snow flew from the tires, and the snow chains began slapping the underside of the car. Timothy looked behind them. The creature was stunned by the impact from the door. It simply stood in place for a few seconds, fingering its cheeks where a patch of white hair had been ripped away. It made a half-hearted attempt to follow the car, then finally it gave up. "All right, Dad," Timothy yelled. "We did it!" Later, the family settled in to spend Christmas Eve in a hotel room. Timothy's father came over and sat on the edge of his mattress and offered him a tired smile. "Thanks for warning us about that thing," he whispered. "You really saved us all." "Yes, Timothy," his mom added. "You were very brave." Timothy nodded at them. "Thanks for listening to me," he said. He glanced around at the small, undecorated hotel room. Christmas hadn't turned out Christmas hadn't turned out the way any of them had planned, but they were all safe. And right now, Timothy thought that was the only thing he could have asked for. He looked over at his little sister in the next bed, but Nicole was already asleep. Clutched between her fingers was a swatch of white fur she'd found inside the car, torn from the snow beast when the door closed on its face. She thought she'd found a piece of Santa Claus's beard, and no one in the family could talk her into giving it up. Whoa, that's like the least evil ending we've ever had in this book series, and that was the end of Scary Stories for Sleepovers number 8. I think that's a good sign if one of the last books in the series managed to do a good job. Let's see what you guys are saying in the chat. And thank you so much, John Dalton, for your generous tip on Venmo. I appreciate it very much. Let's see what you kids are saying. Nice. Jane Migliavacca said, "Nice. Christmas horror." Ray Cersei said, "Mountain Hollow sounds like a great place for a horror story." Oh, wait. Jamar said, "Kid, it's 2020. You're not safe anywhere." Ray Cersei said, "Cue monster in 3, 2, 1. Ray Cersei, "I love Christmas Eve." Me too. I'm a Christmas kid. Ray Cersei said, "Oh, poor Rudolph." Oh, David Denoyer said, "Oh God, it's Gary Busey." Ray Cersei, "I feel like none of them will make it. Either that or Santa's done for." Jamar Calhoun said, "Or it's Randy Quaid." That's funny. Shane Migliavacca said, "That ain't Santa, baby." Ray Cersei, "Do not open the front door." Morgan Moore, "Who brought the Santa from the Futurama back in time?" Jamar said, "Santa Claus is finally tired of your bullcrap." Ray Cersei, "Oh, the suspense." Jamar, "Oh, Dad, we left my PS4. Better turn around." Dwayne said, "My favorite story yet." Thank you. And Craig Cohen said, well read by you there, making it exciting. Thank you. I got really excited by that story. I was starting to tongue-tie myself. Also, I had never heard underdecorated as one word before. Ray Cersei, thank you so much for your tip. And the note on her tip says, craziest version of Rudolph I've ever heard. Heather Fairchild said, this story feels like a cross between Poltergeist, Harry and the Hendersons, and Christmas Vacation. Solid. Okay, guys. So, are you excited to see what book we're reading next? It will be a book from the Scary Stories for Sleepovers series, but we won't know which one until I open it. We've read 3 books in the Scary Stories for Sleepovers series so far. We read the first one, we read the 3rd one, and we read the 8th one. So what say we open this package right here and see what book we got from the Goodwill in South Bend, Indiana. Ooh. Well, this is an interesting coincidence. This is Scary Stories for Sleepovers number 9. So this is the next one in the series, and it looks like some kind of, I think that looks like a scarecrow. I don't know about you guys, but I think that looks like a scarecrow. Unfortunately, unlike the last book, this one does not have, it does not have a, the last book actually had the piece from the library of a school, which was kind of neat. The last time it was checked out was November 16th, 2011, from the Booth and Dimmock Library in Coventry, Connecticut. Well, this one comes from South Bend, Indiana. So let's see what we got going in this book. It is, real quick, it is written by Alan B. Urey. The number 8 was written by Craig Strickland, so we have a author change again. We had an author change on the first book, and books 2 through 7 are all the same author, and then 8 and 9 are 2 different authors. So it's kind of interesting how that works. We have some different authors, so that'll give us a different taste. And just out of curiosity, I wonder when this was published. Copyright 1998. Wow, we're almost into the new millennium. All right, here we go, my friends. First story from Scary Stories for Sleepovers, number 9, another family-friendly horror tale. We're going to tell by the fireplace. This story is called The Boy Inside. Hey, Dogface, why don't you go chase a rabbit? One of Jerry Elfman's classmates taunted. Wow, the last time I saw ears that big, they were on an elephant, another one of the 11-year-old boys snickered. And look at that nose, chided a 3rd, 5th grader. It looks like he got a cucumber between his eyes. You just gonna sit there and take that, Jerry? Asked Ben Taggart, Jerry's best and only friend at Piedmont Junior High. You ought to say something back. Jerry bowed his head, keeping his eyes fixed on the chicken salad sandwich on the lunch table in front of him. They'll just beat me up, Jerry whispered, his voice nearly choking from emotion. And then they'll really make fun of me. He shrugged his shoulder in the direction of the 3 bullies, seated at the next lunch table, but was careful to avoid eye contact with any of them. Boy, when they were handing out ugly, you must have gone back for seconds, said Michael Malick, Jerry's chief tormentor. Although Michael was a month younger than Jerry, the bully had a good 2 inches and 20 pounds on him, and Jerry knew better than to challenge him physically. Oh, why don't you just back off? Ben finally shot back. Ben, don't, Jerry grunted through his clenched teeth. He then grabbed his friend's wrist in a vain attempt to keep the situation from getting worse. What did you say, Taggart? Michael demanded, rising to his feet. His 2 friends stood up as well, their hands balling into fists. They were obviously itching for a fight, and Ben had just given them an excuse. I told you to back off, Ben replied defiantly. That's really stupid to make fun of somebody's looks. You think Jerry can help it if he's ugly? Do you think he likes going around with a face like a basset hound? Do you? Some friend you got there, Elfman, another one of the bullies snickered. He says you got a face like a basset hound. Actually, I'd say more like a dachshund, the third bully said, studying Jerry's face the way a scientist might study a freak of nature. Or maybe a beagle. Someone ought to lock you up in a kennel and throw away the key, Michael said. Ow! He howled like a coyote baying at the moon. His two friends joined in, and then some kids at the next table took up the call. Within seconds, the entire cafeteria was echoing with barks and snarls and yips. It sounded like a pack of wolves had suddenly gone stark raving mad, and in the center of it all was Jerry Elfman. He sat silently with his head bowed in shame, wishing he could crawl into a hole and die. You can't let those boys get to you, Jerry's mother said later that day. They only have as much power as you give them, you know. They said I was ugly, that I looked like a dog, Jerry grumbled. He caught a glimpse of his reflection in the entry hall mirror. Even if he had to admit that he did bear an uncanny resemblance to a canine, his face was unusually long and drawn for an 11-year-old, with a narrow, pronounced nose and large ears that, if seen from the proper angle, seemed to almost come to a point. His eyelids also tended to sag, which gave him the look of a tired bloodhound. The thing is, they're right. I do look like a dog. I'm ugly. Kids can be so cruel, his mother said, shaking her head in dismay. What you don't realize is that beauty is only skin deep. If they only bothered to look harder, they'd see the handsome boy that's inside you. Well, I wish he'd come out already, Jerry groaned impatiently. 'Cause this ugly one here on the outside is getting tired of being laughed at all the time, and I'm getting tired of looking at him. Oh, he'll come out all right, his mother promised, just like the story of the ugly duckling. You wait and see. Someday, you'll wake up and discover that you've been turned into a beautiful swan. Great, Jerry thought, just what I need. Next I'm gonna look like a bird. Jerry was sitting at the dining room table doing his homework when the first sensation hit. It felt like an odd tingling in his fingertips, as if thousands of ants were crawling over them. Jerry set down his pencil and shook out his hand. Writer's cramp, he thought, then returned to his studies. But the tingling continued, now spreading up his fingers and to his palms and wrists. Now he rubbed his hands together, as if trying to restore circulation. He was reminded of the times he'd sat in front of his living room TV, his head propped up on one hand, only to have that hand fall asleep and become uncomfortably numb and awkward. When circulation returned to the hand, the painful tingling was not unlike the sensation he was experiencing now. The only difference was he hadn't been putting any pressure on his hand, and this time both hands were affected. Ouch! Jerry cried aloud as the painful tingling now spread up his arm and to his shoulders. The ants, he initially imagined, were now swarming all over him, pricking his body with their tiny stingers. What's going on, he thought fearfully. What's happening to me? Abandoning his work, Jerry jumped to his feet and ran into the nearby kitchen where his mother was busy preparing a chicken for their dinner. Already, he could feel the tingling moving into his chest and neck. Meanwhile, his fingers, which had been the first to feel the sensation, had begun to feel cold and numb like they'd just spent the past hour packed in ice. Mom, something's happening to me, he managed to choke out. What? His mother replied, caught by surprise. She turned away from the cooking island and immediately saw the terror on her son's face. Honey, what's wrong? I don't know, Jerry said, his eyes filling with tears. I can't feel my hands or my arms. He tried to lift his hands toward her, but suddenly realized to his horror that he couldn't even feel them on his body. When did this start? His mother asked, hurrying toward him. Just a minute ago, Jerry gasped. He was having difficulty breathing now. The strange tingling had now gripped his chest and was moving rapidly to his stomach. He realized that it would soon reach his legs, at which point he didn't know if he'd even be able to stand. Mom, you better call 911. Something horrible is happening to me. Now, calm down, his mother said soothingly. I'm sure you're going to be just fine. How about you lie down on the couch and see how you feel in a few minutes? It's probably just the beginning of the flu. Jerry wanted to believe his mother. He hoped that this was just the onset of the flu, but this wasn't like any flu he'd ever experienced, and he'd been knocked out with the worst of them. Okay, he said with a sigh. He turned toward the living room, but as he did, his head began to swim. The house appeared to whirl crazily around him, and he immediately lost his balance. "Jerry!" he heard his mother scream. The next moment, he was staring up at her from the kitchen floor. If he'd hurt himself when he fell, he never felt it. The harsh fluorescent lights shone directly into Jerry's face. He wanted desperately to turn away to shield his eyes from their painful brightness, but he was unable to lift his arms or even move his head. In fact, he couldn't even feel his body around him. It was as if he were floating in a warm pool, and his face turned toward the sun, his entire being blending perfectly with his surroundings. But this was no comforting pool he was lying in. It was a hospital bed. And he was surrounded by a dozen cold machines, each one responsible for keeping some part of his failing body alive. After what seemed like an eternity in this terrifying state, he became aware of the movement around him. He tried to turn his head, but no matter how hard he tried, the overhead fluorescent light refused to move from its position directly above him. Finally, his mother, his father, and a gray-bearded doctor he remembered seeing soon after his arrival here in the hospital appeared overhead. As they peered down at him, Jerry felt like he was at the bottom of a well looking up at the distant faces far beyond his reach. "Jerry, honey, can you hear us?" his mother asked. "Yes, I can hear you," Jerry thought. "I can hear you just fine." The only problem was, he couldn't find enough strength to move his lips to respond. "He can hear you, Miss Elfman," the doctor assured her. "The EKG readings show that his brain is still functioning perfectly." "Jerry, the doctors think they know what's wrong with you," his father said, struggling to form a smile. "Dr. Crescent, why don't you tell him?" "Well, Jerry, it's like this," the doctor began, his voice stern and serious. "You have a tumor growing on your spinal column. It's blocking the normal flow of electrical impulses through your nervous system. We did a biopsy, that is, we took a sample of the tumor, and it doesn't appear to be cancerous. That's the good news." If Jerry could have breathed a sigh of relief, that's exactly what he would have done at this point. The bad news is, although all the tumor's cells are healthy, it's continuing to grow at an extremely rapid rate, Dr. Crescent continued. "I don't know what else to tell you. It's like nothing we've seen before. We don't know how long the tumor will continue to grow or how long your body will be able to coexist with it. All we know is that we can't operate without leaving you permanently paralyzed. We have some experimental drugs we'd like to try, but to be honest with you, all we can really do is wait, pray, and see what happens." If Jerry could have felt the skin on his face, he'd have sensed that a tear was running down his cheek. A full week had passed since Jerry had been admitted to the hospital. During that time, he'd been poked, prodded, and examined with instruments he couldn't even begin to understand. But despite the best of that modern medical science could do, the doctors had been unable to stop the tumor's relentless growth. It appeared that the boy was doomed. "I'm sorry," Jerry heard Dr. Crescent tell his parents after the last barrage of experimental drugs had failed to have any effect. "We've done our best. The tumor is now occupying over 80% of your son's abdominal cavity. It's putting tremendous pressure on his internal organs. He could go at any time." He could hear his mother sobbing somewhere behind him. He found it strange that, despite the horror that was infesting his body, he felt absolutely no pain or discomfort. Perhaps the paralysis was a blessing in disguise. "There is one odd thing, though," Dr. Crescent continued. "What?" Jerry's father asked, grasping at any glimmer of hope. "The tumor itself is, it's extraordinary," the physician noted. "It's not the random collection of cells we normally find in these cases. It seems to have a definite structure." "Structure? What do you mean, structure?" Jerry's father asked impatiently. "Well, it appears to be organized in a definite pattern," Dr. Crescent began, but before he could continue, he was cut short by Mrs. Elfman's terrified scream. If Jerry could have seen what was happening around him, he'd have seen his mother pointing directly at him, her face filled with terror. He'd have seen his father and Dr. Crescent turn as well, their jaws drop and their eyes open as wide as saucers. And if he could have seen himself, he'd have understood the reason for their reactions. Something was happening to his body. Something awful. His skin, which had been steadily dehydrating since he'd come to the hospital, had begun to crack and peel. Deep fissures were erupting all over his body. Then, incredibly, his skin began to peel back from his face, torso, and limbs like the skin being ripped off of an orange. Something was forcing itself out from within his body. Something dark, wet, and covered with reddish ooze. We need a crash team in here stat, Dr. Crescent shouted. What's happening to him? Jerry's father demanded. What is that thing? His mother gasped. Suddenly, for the first time in a week, Jerry became aware of his arms and legs. He flexed his fingers, tensed his arm muscles, and wiggled his toes. Mom? Dad? He gasped, his voice weak, raspy from inactivity. His muscles painfully stiff, he sat up in bed and became aware that he was covered from head to toe with a reddish jelly-like substance. The stuff smelled foul, and he tried to brush it off his bare arms. It was then that he saw something lying on the floor at the foot of his bed. Something he at first couldn't quite make out. It appeared to be some kind of flesh-covered fabric, one that had been ripped and torn by a wild animal. He nearly fainted when he realized he was looking down at his own skin. Jerry, are you okay? His mother asked, desperately. I'm fine, he whispered, not quite certain how he felt. How are you feeling? His mother asked. Is that really you, son? His father asked curiously. What do you mean? He replied. Her hand shaking, his mother held up a makeup mirror in front of Jerry's face. He brushed the jelly-like goo off of his cheeks and forehead and tried to wipe the awful stuff out of his hair. Although he was still coated with the slime, he quickly understood the reason for his parents' confusion. His once prominent nose had shrunk by half. His cheekbones had risen, and his once slack jaw had become sharp and firm. Not only that, but the scrawny chest and flabby stomach he'd always known had suddenly turned hard and muscular. No, not turned. They'd been replaced. He'd suddenly become handsome. The tumor, he gasped in sudden comprehension. The thing that was growing inside me. It wasn't a tumor at all. It was a whole new body. It must have been some kind of metamorphosis, Jerry's dad speculated. Like a caterpillar turning into a beautiful butterfly. Or an ugly duckling becoming a beautiful swan, Jerry's mother said, smiling. Jerry smiled too. His mom had always talked about the handsome boy inside him. Now, at long last, it had revealed itself. A 4-person medical team arrived with various emergency gear. They looked to Dr. Crescent for instructions. The emergency's over, the doctor said. Let's give this boy a shower and clean him up. Then I want to start a new series of tests. We're going to figure out what the heck just happened here. Suddenly, brimming with energy, Jerry offered his arms to the medical personnel as they helped him off the bed. Boy, he said with a grin, wait till the kids at school see me now, His mind began to spin with all the possibilities. I'll show them. Now I'll be the best looking. Now I'll be the one who... He took a step toward the door and suddenly felt his legs collapse beneath him. Are you okay? His mother asked with alarm. I don't know, Jerry stammered. I can't feel my legs again. The awful tingling sensation had returned. It washed over his body like a powerful wave, causing him to go numb all over. Get him to an MRI, stat, Dr. Crescent ordered. I want a full body scan, hurry! But Jerry didn't need to see the results of any test to know what was happening to him. He could sense that there was another tumor already inside him. It was on his spine, choking his nerves and blood vessels. And it was growing. That one was very strange. I like it though. Just when you think you figured out where these stories are going to go, they throw you some body horror. So I guess that just goes to show you, be happy with yourself, or else you might become a new boy every week. Henwolf is blocking my light, but she's cute, so I'm going to allow it. So let's see what you guys are saying in the chat. Alright, oh, big doggy. She's such a good dog. Yes, you are. Sorry you guys can't see her. She's just a little too low to the ground, and I'm a one-man band because, you know, I'm the only one allowed to be, around me. um, let's see what you guys are saying. Shane Migliavacca said, "I'll be sad when you run out of these books. It'll be a while, my friend. It'll be a while. And then I can try moving on to other ones like Spooky Ohio. But it looks like I'm doing about a half a book a night. So there are 10 books. We might be okay. Let's see. Shane Migliavacca, it's called puberty, Jerry. Well, this is extreme puberty. Cold Machines, great Alice Cooper song. Never heard of her. Tony Ginnott, I'm here. I forgot it was Wednesday. Dude, I forget. One of the only reasons I know what day of the week Wednesday is because of the show. So, Shane Migliavacca, the bad news is you have no health insurance. Michelle Antisocial said, what the actual heck? Morgan Moore, this story is not at all what I was expecting. Agreed. Tony Giannott, moisturize me. Raymond Brown, he's a dog. Almost, I wouldn't have been shocked if he turned into a dog. Ray Cersei said, oh man, I'm sorry I missed this one. Shane Migliavacca, the beast within. Raymond Brown, nope, not a dog. Shane Migliavacca, he's a Time Lord? Oh, you guys got jokes. I like it. So I'm going to take just a moment to rest my voice. And we'll read a few more till around 10 o'clock. I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me, cracking wise in the chat, and just, overall passing the time in a constructive way. Of course, I will mention, that there is the option to tip down below, and I do appreciate it. The tips have actually helped a lot throughout this entire isolation because of the lack of work. So I do appreciate it very much. But also, hit that share button. Get people to tune in with us. That's way more important. Because the more, the scarier. I'm funny. Ah, man. It starts to hit the voice pretty hard about an hour in, though, I gotta admit. I need to get more throat-numbing stuff. All right. So let's see what you guys are up to. All right. Very good, very good. Okay, well, I guess we should dive into another story. From Scary Stories for Sleepovers number 9. Ooh, I like this title. This story is called The Girl in the Attic. I knew there was something strange about the vacation cabin the minute I saw it. It certainly wasn't the building's classic log cabin design, its location on the northern shore of Wisconsin's Lake Wapaka, or its freshly painted exterior. In fact, from an objective point of view, the house was as beautiful as anything out of a picture postcard. No, it was the feeling I got when we pulled up the gravel path and first saw the rustic 2-story home that convinced me that something there was very, very wrong. I felt cold, clammy. It was the same unsettled feeling you might get when looking down into a dank, unlit basement or driving past a cemetery at night. It creeped me out. My fear must have been obvious on my face because my younger sister Sarah spoke up even before our dad stopped the van. "What's wrong, Lisa?" she asked. You see something, don't you? This wasn't an unusual question for Sarah to ask me. All my life I'd been famous for my heightened senses. I'd always been able to see things that were far away for most people, without the use of binoculars, or too small for normal folks to spot without a magnifying glass. Supposedly, my hearing was as good as most dogs, and my elevated senses of taste and smell made me a very fussy eater, ever since I was a baby. Because I noticed things that other people couldn't see or just tended to ignore, Sarah had come to depend on me to act as an early warning system whenever we went somewhere new. "It's the cabin," I said softly, keeping my eyes fixed on the attractive, well-maintained structure. "What about it?" Dad asked, turning around to look at me. "You see termites or something?" My father was also well aware of my special powers. but usually made them the butt of good-natured jokes. The last thing he wanted me to feel like was some kind of freak. "No, it looks fine," I replied. "I just get the feeling..." I stopped. I didn't know how to put my misgivings into words the others would understand. Finally, I forced a smile. "I get the feeling we're going to have a great time here." "I sure hope so," Mom said with a sigh of relief. "We're sure paying enough for this place." Ooh. The lakeside cabin, which my parents had rented through a travel agent, was actually pretty small on the inside. The downstairs consisted of basically one big living room that had a kitchenette in one corner. A sofa and several chairs were grouped around a stone fireplace, and in another corner stood a small TV equipped with a VCR. A staircase took you up to the second-floor landing. There were 2 bedrooms up there. Mom and Dad were to sleep in one, and Sarah and I would share the other. Although the cabin wasn't fancy, it was clean and definitely cozy. Most people would see it as a great place to spend a relaxing week away from noise and pressure of the city. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that there was something wrong about this house, something that carried the stench of death. Since I had nothing to back up my suspicions, I kept up a happy front as we all unpacked and got ready for dinner. But as I was helping Mom prepare some ground beef we'd brought from home, I heard something that immediately shattered any hopes I may have had that this was going to be a normal family outing. "Help!" I heard someone scream. "Help me, please! Don't let me die!" I immediately turned away from the kitchen counter. The voice was a girl's. She was scared out of her mind, and she sounded very, very close. "Help me!" I heard her scream again. "I'm up here!" I immediately turned to my mom. "Did you hear that?" I asked urgently. "Hear what?" Mom replied, her concentration on the mass of ground beef she was mixing with eggs and seasonings. "There's a girl shouting for help," I said. "We've got to do something." I ran to the front window but could see nothing but our car in the driveway, the thick woods and the shimmering lake beyond. "What's going on?" my dad asked, coming down the stairs with Sarah close behind. "Lisa thinks she heard a girl calling for help," Mom told him, a nervous twinge to her voice. "Well, let's go take a look," said Dad as he headed for the front door. Dad, Sarah, and I assembled outside the house. As this was early July, the sun was still high in the sky and the air was pleasantly warm. I strained to listen, but all I could hear was the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the gentle wind. "Well?" Dad asked. "You still hear it?" "Not anymore," I confessed. "Maybe the girl was calling from another cabin," Sarah suggested. "I don't think there's another cabin around here for at least a quarter mile," Dad said. "Lisa's hearing may be good, but it's not that good." "Besides, it didn't sound far away," I said. "It sounded close, almost as if it were coming from inside the house." "Let's look around," said Sarah. "Maybe she's around here somewhere." "Don't go far," Dad warned. "We don't want you getting lost in the forest on your first day." "We won't," I said, and began to lead Sarah around the back of the cabin. My sister and I explored the thick woods around the house for almost a half hour, until Mom called us in to set the table for dinner. We saw no sign of people anywhere, let alone a girl in trouble. It was so strange. I knew I'd heard the cries for help. They weren't just my imagination, but what could I do about it? Finally, I decided to just let it go. If a girl had gotten into trouble, maybe we'd read about it in the local paper. If there even was such a thing out here so many miles from civilization. Things passed pretty uneventfully for the next few days. Sarah and I went fishing with Dad on the lake. I actually caught a 4-pound bass, and while Sarah's catches consisted mostly of little sunfish, which Dad made her throw back. We all went hiking in the woods, and Mom spent a lot of the time painting landscapes. And then, on our 5th day at the cabin, I was running up to my room to get a sweatshirt when I heard the girl, I again heard the girl's voice. "Help!" she shouted. "Help me, please! I'm up here, in the attic! You've got to let me out! Someone, please! Don't let me die!" Terrified, I immediately bolted back downstairs where the rest of my family was waiting. "She's upstairs! She's in the attic!" I shouted in alarm. "Who's upstairs?" Mom asked. "The girl I heard the other day," I said, realizing how strange I sounded, even as I said it. "She's stuck in the attic! We've got to let her out!" "How could a girl get in our attic?" Sarah asked skeptically. Wouldn't we have seen her? I don't know, but I just heard her, I insisted. Dad, please, we have to go up there. All right, I'll check the attic, Dad said with a sigh. But if there's a girl trapped up there, I'll be very, very surprised. Moving as one, we all went up the stairs to the second floor, gathering on the landing. We looked up at the hinged ceiling panel that led to the attic above. Hello, Dad called, his hands cupped around his mouth. Is anybody up there? The response was nothing but eerie silence. There's nobody up there, Sarah stated. This time, Lisa, I think you've been hearing things. I know what I heard, I insisted. If nobody else will go up there, I will. I'll check, Dad had volunteered. Everybody stand back. He opened the nearby linen closet and pulled out a 4-foot-long wooden pole with a hook on the end. He looped the hook through the handle in the ceiling panel and pulled. The spring-loaded latch released and the panel swung down like a hinged door, and a ladder dropped out. Hello? I called up through the dark, narrow opening. There was still no response. Here, dear, said Mom, handing Dad a flashlight she grabbed from her bedroom. Flashlight in hand, Dad climbed the rickety ladder and stuck his head up through the opening. There's nothing up here but some old boxes, he reported. Are you sure? I asked. Come see for yourself, he said, climbing back down to the floor. He handed me the flashlight and I nervously started to climb up the attic above. Getting just high enough to poke my head through, I swung the light beam around to take a look. Dad was right. The attic, which ran the length of the house, but was only about 4 feet high, contained a few boxes and nothing else. There was certainly no sign of a human habitation, let alone a trapped girl. Well, Sarah asked, any bodies up there? Nothing, I said with a sigh. I wasn't sure if it was a sigh of relief or one of frustration. If the girl I'd heard wasn't in our attic, then where was she? And how long could she survive before someone came to help her? Oh, Chicano wants me to pet him. Hi, buddy boy. You're a good dog. You're a good doggy. He's trying to hold my hand. He's putting his paw into my hand and just holding it there. Buddy, I gotta let it go. Good dog. Good dog. I was deep asleep when I suddenly became aware of someone shaking my shoulder. Get up, my dad shouted. Hurry! We have to get out of here. Groggy from sleep, I propped myself up on my elbows and tried to focus my eyes. It was still pitch dark in the room. My bedside clock read 3:52 a.m. The dogs are both blocking my light right now. I sniffed the air. It smelled strange, like smoke. What's going on? I groaned. The house is on fire, Dad said, grabbing my arm and pulling me out of bed. I think the hot water heater short-circuited. We've got to get out, fast! Get your shoes on and grab your jacket, hurry! Mom was already helping Sarah get on her robe as I stumbled out of bed and searched for my shoes. Looking through the bedroom doorway, I could see a weird flickering orange glow on the wall near my parents' room. It immediately made my heart switch into overdrive. I'd frequently had nightmares about being caught in a fire. Now it was happening for real. What about our clothes? Sarah asked. We can always buy new clothes, Mom assured her, but I can't buy a new you. Let's get out of here. Barely a minute after Dad had rousted me from bed, all 4 of us were thundering down the stairs heading for the front door. Looking back, I could see that the entire end of the house was already in flames. Part of the kitchen was burning. The air was thick with smoke. Coughing and choking, we stumbled through the front door out into the cold, damp night. Dad fumbled for his car keys as we headed for our minivan. Shouldn't we call the fire department? Sarah asked. We already did, Mom replied, but it's going to take them at least 20 minutes to get here from town. They told us to get to safe distance from the house in case the fire spreads to the woods. Dad opened the sliding door for Sarah and me. I was about to get in when I heard a girl's voice call through the darkness. Help me, she cried. I'm in the house. I'm in the attic. Please don't let me die. She's still in the house, I shouted at my parents. Who's in the house? Dad asked. The girl, I exclaimed. The girl in the attic. We have to help her. No, said Mom. There's no one up there. But it was too late. I was already running back to the house. I could just imagine some poor confused girl trapped in our dark, cramped attic, going out of her mind as the air became stifling hot and the smoke curled up through the floorboards. I knew I couldn't let her die like that. I knew I had to help her. When I got back to the cabin, the fire had already spread to parts of the main living room. I had to shield my face with my arms to protect myself from the intense heat as I made my way to the stairway. Choking on the smoke-filled air, I stumbled my way up to the second-story landing, opened the linen closet door, and found the pole with the hook on it. "Lisa, don't! Come back!" The voice was my father's. I looked back but could no longer see the first floor because of the thick smoke. If he was coming after me, he was going to have a hard time finding his way through all the soot and ash that filled the air. Pole in hand, I reached up, and after 2 tries, I found the pull ring. I yanked down and the spring latch released. The panel swung down and the ladder extended. I grabbed hold of the wooden rung and began to climb. It was pitch dark in the attic. I hadn't brought a flashlight with me, so I couldn't even see as far as the end of my nose. "Hello?" I called. "Is anybody up here? You have to get out. The house is on fire. I'm here to help you." On my knees, I began crawling along the floor, groping my way through the inky blackness. The floorboards felt unnaturally warm. Clearly, the fire was getting close. If I was going to save the girl, I'd have to save her fast. "Don't be afraid," I called into the void. "Let me help you. We have to get out of here." Just then, the entire house shifted slightly, and I was thrown off balance. And that same moment, the access panel in the floor swung shut and locked with a snap. Alarmed, I turned and retraced my steps, feeling about the trap door. I began to cough and wheeze as the air began to grow thick with smoke from the fire below. Finally, I found the panel, but I couldn't make it budge. "Oh no," I cried aloud as I realized that the lock could only be released from the other side. "Help!" I shouted. "Help me! I'm in the attic! Let me out!" I pounded frantically on the panel, but I couldn't get it to move. The smoke was growing thicker and I could barely breathe. "Help me!" I screamed again, louder. "Don't let me die in here!" Just then, a cold shudder ran through my body. I'd heard those words before. They'd been shouted by the girl in the attic, the girl who'd drawn me up there in the first place. And then the horrifying truth hit me. I was the girl in the attic. I hadn't been hearing voices from another place. They'd been from another time. I'd been hearing my own screams, the screams of my own death. "No!" I cried, tears running down my cheeks. Balling my fists, I pounded furiously on the panel. I turned and kicked with all my might. Crack! The panel began to split. I kicked again. With a sickening snap, the hinges broke free and the panel dropped out of sight. Just as it did, a ball of searing flames exploded up through the rectangular opening. The fire was already on the second floor. It was all around me. I was trapped. There was no way out. The girl in the attic was indeed going to die. Ah! Oh! Man, this book is setting some different tones, my friends. Wow, that one was intense. What did you kids think about that one? Let's see what you guys are saying. That one was fun. It's rare that these books go first person, and I really get a kick out of reading first person. Pardon my throat clearing. Let's see what you guys are saying. Why is everyone always on vacation? I think maybe you're just jealous, Ray. I'm jealous too. Michelle said, first person. Agreed. Morgan Moore, because they are bad and not social distancing. Ray Cersei said, rude. Tony Janot said, the sequel to The Girl in the Crawl Space. Craig Cohen said, it's the prequel. Ray Cersei said, aw, doggy, he was being so cute. He was trying to distract me from my reading. That's why you can't buy cheap duct tape. Too easy for them to slip it off from around their mouth. Well, Keith. Tony Janot said, the dogs are adding the flickering fire effect. It's funny. Tony Janot said, I've lost so many girls that way. Sad face. Aww. Ray Cersei said, this is a really good one. I agree. Tony said, I think it's her voice from the future that she's hearing. Nailed it. Ray Cersei said, holy crap. I mean, holy cow. Sorry, family show. That one had me on the edge of my seat. Me too, man. Morgan Murr said, good God, that was intense and awesome. Agreed. Keith Tomlin said, so dark. I like it. Ray Brown said, that was awesome. And Tony Janot said, that was a good one. I agree. I think that Scary Stories number 9 is going to give us a lot of nice thrills and chills for our buck. I think I scored all these books for under $5 a piece. And I bought them. What a beautiful segue. I bought these books with your generous donations. So, do keep in mind that a tip here and there definitely makes the night a little brighter. And I'm going to get ready to read. I think I got 2 more in me before my voice starts to go, which should lead us almost perfectly to 10 o'clock. Sorry about the throat clearing, but I have to do it. All right. Well, my friends, why don't we find out what's coming for us next? Ooh, this book, I have a feeling that all of these stories are going to be a bit different than what you guys have been used to. Because this title's real good. Hi, Henwolf. You're a good doggy. Yes, you are. You're a big old baby. Yeah. This story, my friends, is called Rules is Rules. Camp Elkhart was supposed to be a fun place for kids. At least, that's what my mom and dad told me. The camp was up in northern Minnesota and had everything from baseball to go-karts. Baseball to go-karts. The place even had its own lake where kids could go swimming, fishing, and boating. What more could a kid ask for, right? Well, my friend Kevin Blaine wanted more. He wanted better food. He wanted firmer mattresses. But most of all, he wanted freedom. Frank, this place is like a prison, he complained to me after our first week at camp. They got rules for everything. They got rules for when you can eat, how much you can eat, what paths you can hike on, how far you can swim, what time you have to go to bed. Heck, if I wanted all these rules, I'd have joined the army. Of course, being only 13, Kevin wasn't exactly ready to enlist in the military. Still, even I had to agree that the guy had a point. The man who owned Camp Elkhart, a big, hairy ex-police lieutenant named Vince Mancuso, was very strict, and he passed this no-nonsense attitude on to his counselors. Kids who disobeyed the rules were denied privileges, which could mean anything from losing a night's dessert to being confined all day to the bunkhouse. The rule we all hated was the one that said we had to bring all our boats in off the lake by 5 o'clock. This made no sense to us, since in northern Minnesota the sun didn't even set until around 9 o'clock during July. Why waste 4 good hours of daylight? One day, we finally confronted our counselor, a tall, blonde-haired college athlete named Mitch Logan, about this stupid rule. Hey, rules is rules, Mitch replied in his typically ungrammatical fashion. We got 'em for a reason, for your own protection. You break the rules and awful things can happen to you. Like what? No pudding after dinner? My friend Kevin asked sarcastically. Hey, don't be a smart aleck, Blaine, Mitch shot back. A few years ago, a bunch of kids broke the rules and, well, let's just say they won't be coming back to this camp again. What's that supposed to mean? I asked. You mean they're dead? I didn't say that, Mitch said defensively. Just keep your nose clean. Don't ask too many questions, and everything will be just fine. Kevin wasn't satisfied with Mitch's lame scare tactics, and one day decided to see what could possibly happen to someone who had the guts to break one of Camp Elkhart's primary rules. The next day, around 4 p.m., Kevin approached me while I was deep into trading baseball cards with some of our bunkmates. Hey, Frank, let's take a boat out on the lake, Kevin suggested. It had been a really hot day. The afternoon temperatures had climbed well into the 90s, and a trip out onto the cool, spring-fed lake sounded like a really good idea to me. But then I looked at my watch. We'd only have an hour, I said. Remember, all the boats have to be off the lake by 5. We'll have plenty of time, Kevin said with a mischievous grin. Trust me. Excusing myself from the not card traders, I followed Kevin from our bunkhouse down to the winding trail into the rocky lakeshore. There we found 3 aluminum rowboats sitting on the water's edge, their paddles already in place. Come on, this will be fun, Kevin said as he tossed me a bright orange life preserver. I can't wait to get out on the water. Together, Kevin and I pushed the lightweight rowboat off the beach and onto the smooth, calm water. We quickly jumped aboard, barely getting our sneakers wet, then took positions on opposite ends of the small boat. Kevin, who had assumed the stern position behind me, grabbed the oar handles and began to row at a slow, steady pace. Ah, this is the life, I sighed, as I leaned back, turning my face toward the blazing sun. Sure beats doing homework, Kevin agreed. Hey, how about we row to the other side of the lake and back? Do we have time? I asked, again glancing at my watch. We had rowed the mile-long trip many times, and it usually took us at least 45 minutes to make the full circuit. No problem, Kevin said, with a devious look in his eye. He turned the boat directly away from camp and continued to row at a slow, steady pace. We reached the opposite shore 20 minutes later. Unlike most of the lakes here in northern Minnesota, this body of water had no development around it other than Camp Elkhart. There were no vacation homes, no corporate lodges, not even a campground. There were only pine trees, oaks, and a thick forest underbrush. I'd always found this rather odd. When everyone was building vacation homes, why hadn't anyone developed this place? The lake itself was cool and clean, and the surrounding countryside was gorgeous. There was access to Interstate 30 just a few miles to the south, so it wasn't like the lake was in the boonies. Why, then, was Lieutenant Mancuso the only person to ever build here? Again, I looked at my watch. It's 4:45, I cried. We gotta get back before we get in big trouble. Don't sweat it, Kevin said, lying back with his hands laced behind his head. It's time someone stood up to Lieutenant Mancuso and his stupid rules. Hey, you can do what you want, Kev, but why drag me into it? I protested. I plunked myself down on the seat next to Kevin and grabbed the oar handles. What do you think you're doing? Kevin challenged. Taking us back, I announced as I dug the oars into the water. No way, said Kevin as he grabbed for my right hand. I don't want to get in trouble, I insisted as I continued to row us back toward the distant beach. I'll take the full blame, Kevin offered. Why would you do that? I asked. Because I want to show them that people can be on the lake after 5 without anything bad happening, Kevin explained. Wouldn't you like to be able to go boating after dinner? I mean, what's the point of having a lake if you can't use it when you want to? I considered my friend's argument for a moment. I had to agree that 5 o'clock curfew did seem a bit much, if not downright ridiculous. Still, was worth getting in trouble with Lieutenant Mancuso and Mitch Logan? Was it worth getting Lieutenant Mancuso and Mitch Logan mad at me just to make a point? Before I could reply, Kevin yanked the starboard oar out of its mooring and tossed it into the water. Hey, what are you doing? I cried in disbelief. Now it really is my fault, Kevin announced. I lost the oar. We couldn't get back in time. You really are nuts, you know that? I said. Exactly, and there's no point in arguing with a crazy man, Kevin said with an exaggerated smile. Once again, he laced his fingers, slipped them behind his head, and lay back against the side of the boat. My anger rising, I moved myself to the edge of the boat. Spinning around, splashing water madly, I watched in unspeakable horror as my friend Kevin thrashed wildly about, trying to free himself from the... What the... Hold on. Sorry about that. The book skipped a skipped a thing. Sorry about that. The page stuck together. What are you doing? Kevin demanded. I'm going to get the oar, I said, checking the buckles on my life vest. No, you're not, said Kevin. He grabbed the end of my t-shirt and gripped it tightly. Let me go, I ordered. Not till you sit down and shut up, Kevin replied. Can't you see I'm trying to make a point? I gave a frustrated sigh and gazed across the water at the cabins of distant Camp Elkhart. From here I could see the other kids moving about, some coming in off the baseball field, others heading for the mess hall for dinner. A few kids were waving at us, signaling us to come in off the water, but all I could do was just sit there weakly and wave back. Frustrated, I again looked at my watch. It was now 5:10. Now we're really in big trouble, I sighed. I could just imagine Mitch sentencing me to kitchen cleanup duty for the remainder of my 4-week stay. Kevin didn't seem to mind. He still leaned back, hands laced behind his head, looking like a kid who didn't have a care in the world. Suddenly, there was a deep thump, and the boat rocked to one side. What was that? I asked in alarm. I don't know, Kevin said, bolting upright. It felt like we hit something. I peered over the boat's starboard side, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever it was that hit our hull. I suspected we struck a floating log or submerged tree trunk, but I saw no sign of either. Thump! The boat was jolted again, this time with even greater force. We didn't hit anything, I realized. Something hit us. You mean like a fish? Kevin asked. If it's a fish, it's a really big fish, I stated, still searching for a glimpse of our unseen attacker. I tried to imagine what kind of lake creature could be large enough to strike this boat with that kind of impact we'd felt. Kevin and I had fished this lake all week, and all we'd ever caught were perch and sunfish, neither of which was more than 6 inches long. There were rumors in camp that a few bass also lived in the lake, but so far no one had actually caught one of these fish. And besides, bass weren't known for slamming themselves into fishing boats, so what the heck was this thing? I turned nervously to Kevin, hoping my friend could provide an answer. As I did, I watched in mounting horror as a huge, snake-like tentacle rose out of the water directly behind my bunkmate, sickly purple in color and covered with dozens of large suction cups. The glistening snake-like arms slowly reached down toward Kevin's head. I tried to speak, to shout a warning, but fear had clamped my throat as tight as a bear trap. "What is it?" Kevin asked, seeing the terror in my eyes. He turned around and seeing the huge tentacle reaching down for him, he let out a horrific scream. Wham! The aluminum rowboat shuddered as if it had suddenly been lifted several feet into the air, then tossed aside like a child's toy. It felt like someone had slapped me hard in the face as I hit the cool lake water, and for several seconds, I couldn't tell which end was up. Fortunately, my life jacket was strapped on, and a moment later my head bobbed to the surface, allowing me to grab a lungful of air. Spinning around, splashing water madly, I watched in unspeakable terror as my friend Kevin thrashed wildly about, trying to free himself from the grip of the huge tentacle that had now wrapped itself around his body like a boa constrictor enveloping a hapless rabbit. "Help! Help!" he screamed, but his cries were cut short as all the air was brutally squeezed from his chest. Then something rose out of the water directly beneath the tentacle. I glimpsed it for only a second, but it looked like a mouth, at least 3 feet in diameter, and studded with several rows of sharp triangular teeth. The tentacle lowered Kevin's twitching body directly into the monster's waiting mouth. A moment later, it was all over. The mouth was gone. The tentacle was gone. Kevin was gone. I was all alone in the water. Even our rowboat was nowhere to be seen. I couldn't say how I managed to get back to shore. I wasn't sure how long I'd remained floating motionless in the water, and I didn't remember swimming to the nearest shore or stumbling through the shadowy woods back to camp. One minute I was alone in the middle of the lake. The next, I was staggering into Camp Elkhart's mess hall where the other kids, already finishing dinner, stared at me like I was a creature from another planet. "Kevin," I managed to force out of my constricted throat. "Kevin's dead." The other kids just stared at me in dead silence. And no wonder. I knew my hair was a mess, my clothes were dripping wet, and my eyes were eerily dark and hollow. All the color I'd gotten from weeks in the sun must have completely drained from my face. Mitch Logan rose from his chair and hurried over to me. "You were out on the lake, weren't you?" he whispered in my ear. "Kevin," I repeated, my voice shaking. "Something got Kevin." "Come with me," Mitch said, turning me away from the others. "We're going to see Lieutenant Mancuso." I was still so scared that it took me nearly an hour to tell the whole horrific tale to the retired police detective. As Mitch looked on, I told the man everything. How Kevin had talked me into going on the lake at around 4 o'clock, how he'd thrown the oar overboard, how the huge lake monster had risen up and plucked my friend out of the boat like an appetizer off a silver party platter. I was surprised by Lieutenant Mancuso's reaction. Or rather, his lack of reaction. As I told my incredible tale, he just stared at me with his dark brown eyes, his expression unchanging. It was like this story was what he expected to hear. Like I was giving just another routine police report. It took me a while to understand the reason for the man's indifference. And when I figured it out, it chilled me even more than the water had. "You knew that monster was out there, didn't you?" I said, looking at Lieutenant Mancuso accusingly. "That's why no one else has built around this lake. It's 'cause of the monster. You knew about it too, but you let us play in the water. Why? How could you do that?" I was now so worked up, I was nearly hysterical. "We told you, no sailing after 5 o'clock," Mitch reminded me. "Nothing would have happened if you'd followed the rules." "You mean that thing only feeds after 5? I asked in disbelief. "This has happened before, hasn't it? To those other campers you told us about." "Well, thanks for sharing." "It was a boating accident," Lieutenant Mancuso said softly. "What?" I asked. "You and your friend Kevin were on the lake together," Lieutenant Mancuso said matter-of-factly. "Kevin dropped one of the oars. He reached over to get it. He fell in the water. He wasn't wearing a life preserver. He drowned. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy." "But that's not what happened," I protested. "Sure it is," Mitch stated, his voice flat and robot-like. "Accidents happen. That doesn't mean that you have to shut down the whole camp or that Lieutenant Mancuso has to lose his whole life savings. No, this camp has to keep going for everybody's sake." I didn't bother to reply. I could see from the cold, hard look in Lieutenant Mancuso's eyes that he was going to stick to his story no matter what. He had all the money he'd ever saved tied up in this camp, and there was no way in the world he was going to give it up. If it cost the lives of some kids every few years, that was just too bad. It was enough to make me want to throw up. "It's getting late," Mitch said, pointing to the wall-mounted clock. "Almost 10 o'clock. Curfew. Time to get in your cabin." "Sure," I said softly as I rose from my chair. "I'll call Kevin's parents tonight and tell them what happened," Lieutenant Mancuso said, "and I'll tell them you did everything you could to save your friend." I merely nodded as I turned and headed for the door. I was halfway to my bunkhouse when I felt the need to say one last final farewell to my departed friend. Overwhelmed by a deep sense of loss, I walked down to the lakeshore, walked out onto the deserted pier, and looked out over the wide, empty lake, its still waters reflecting the light of the bright full moon. "I'm really going to miss you, Kevin," I said, my eyes welling up with tears. "You shouldn't have died like that. We should have known about the monster. I mean, this camp shouldn't even be here. I don't care what Mitch says. I'm going to tell people the truth. I owe you that much." Filled with a new sense of determination, I turned away from the lake and headed up the dirt pathway back to the cabin. But when I got to the wood frame building, I found that the door was locked. "Hey, open up," I said, knocking on the door. "It's me, Frank." "You know what time it is, Frank?" Mitch asked from the other side of the door. I glanced at my glowing watch face. It read 10:03. "So I'm 3 minutes late," I protested. "What's the big deal? Let me in." Just then, I heard movement in the nearest bushes. Something moving in the inky darkness. Something large as a man or bigger. "Come on, Mitch, let me in," I demanded, my voice now choking with fear. I pounded my fist angrily on the door. "Curfew is 10 o'clock, Mitch stated. "We got reasons for these things. You can't say you weren't warned." Something snarled close to my ear, sweat pouring down my face. I spun about to find myself staring into two hot yellow eyes. They were neither the eyes of a person nor an animal. They were the eyes of something monstrous, something evil. "Sorry, kid," Mitch said, just as the monster targeted its claws on my throat. "But rules is rules." Woohoo! Man, I gotta say, this edition of Scary Stories is a lot of innocent kids biting the dust. That's pretty harsh. Thank you very much, Keith Tomlin, for your tip. I really appreciate it, my man. Let's see what you guys are saying in there as Henwolf takes a nap. Good dog. Let's see what you guys are saying. Ray Cersei said, "Uh-oh." And these kids are in trouble. Keith Tomlin said, "Rules are for suckers." Morgan Moore said, "Welp, now they're really in trouble." Ray said, "The lake is going to eat them." Womp, poor Kevin. Yikes, that camp is scary. And then Keith said, "I love a happy ending." Keith, you're You're something, but thank you for the tip. Ah, man. My voice is doing okay, but it was starting to give a little bit during that one. So we'll do one more tonight here in just a moment. Tony said, like they couldn't have opened the door for him. Yeah, really, like why would they open the door? What I want to know is, I don't even want to know. Initially I was going to say what I want to know is why the monsters keep a specific Eastern or a specific Central Standard Time schedule. You know, they're in Minnesota, 5 p.m. You start hunting at 10 p.m. The monster in the woods starts hunting. I don't know if it's if it's that I'm wondering why that is so, or if I'm more wondering how they figured it out. Like if when they were on the land, they're like, man, these monsters keep eating us. What time is it? It's 5:02. Let's come back at 5:01. And then they get eaten and they're like, let's come back at 5 o'clock. Just saying. I mean, I guess that's science. Tony said, like they couldn't have opened. Oh yeah, he said they should make that. They should make that into an actual movie. You should, Hen. Hey man, if I knew how to get a hold of the rights holders of this, I don't know. I would love to do another kids movie. I had a very good time with. I did a Bulldog for Christmas, which was a kids movie, and Calamity Jane's Revenge is borderline a kids movie. Like it's a PG Western type of deal. Those were both pretty good for kids. I would love to do a kids horror movie or even another kids comedy, something like that. Keith Tomlin said, must be salary. No one likes to work overtime. That's solid. That's a solid one. So I guess we're going to do one more, my friends, and then we're going to get out of here. So I do want to mention again, tipping is not required, but it is heavily appreciated. And thank you so much to everybody who's been so generous with throwing me a couple of tips. I do really appreciate it. I also want to say, hit share, because we got one more story left, and then I can go cuddle with Henwolf and Chicano. Henwolf is literally sleeping like right here, touching my left foot. She's just out cold. She's even snoring. I can hear it just barely. Anyway. So one more story, and we'll call it a night for this week. But of course, I'll be back next Wednesday. Same time, same channel. So, what do we got here? This story is called Sound Bites. Hunter Smith was singing to me. Just to me. All I could do was sit there, still as a statue, as Hunter's steel blue eyes bore directly into mine, his long wheat brown hair hanging heavily over his sweat-covered face, and his rough yet heavenly sweet voice piercing straight into my soul. Behind him, guitars screamed like tortured banshees, and drums boomed like cannons, sweeping me up into a dizzying whirlwind of powerful emotions. I felt as if it were a dream. I were in a dream from which I never wanted to awaken. Such was the power of Hunter Smith's music. Gene! Someone was calling my name. Gene Ingersoll! I tightly closed my eyes, hoping that whoever this visitor was, he'd leave before Hunter's magical spell was broken. Gene Hunter! Turn that music down! My father was now shouting directly into my ear. Although Hunter Smith's voice still blasted through my bedroom, the man himself had disappeared, replaced by a mere two-dimensional color poster taped to my closet door. Are you trying to blow up the house? My father asked angrily. Before I could reply, Dad stormed over to my shelf-mounted stereo and snapped off the power. My bedroom was instantly plunged into eerie silence. At that moment, I felt as if someone had just torn my heart from my chest. What are you doing? I cried, leaping off my bed. I made a desperate lunge for the stereo, but my father, who was a good 5 inches taller than me, grabbed my outstretched arm and brought me to an immediate halt. Let me go, I demanded, struggling to pull free. No more music, my father said, his voice now little more than a whisper. I knew he was very angry. It's almost 9 o'clock. Enough is enough. This is my room, I insisted, finally yanking my arm away. I can do whatever I want. This may be your room, young lady, but it's still my house, my dad countered. And as long as you live under my roof, you'll live under my rules. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. He'd used that "this is my house" line hundreds of times before, and frankly, it was getting a little old. Are you going to listen to me, young lady? He asked. Yeah, I hear you, I said with a weary sigh. Look, all my homework's done. I don't want to watch TV. I just want to listen to my music. What's wrong with that? What's wrong is that you have the volume cranked as loud as a jet engine, Dad said, turning my stereo's volume knob down. I can feel the whole house shaking, even downstairs. That's the way you're supposed to listen to rock music, I explained. You don't just hear it, you have to feel it. Maybe you do, but I don't, Dad said. It's so loud that even the neighbors are starting to complain. Fine, I said, knowing this was one argument I wasn't going to win. At least not tonight. I'll use headphones. Will that make you happy? No, I don't think so, said Dad. Why not? I asked in surprise. Without saying another word, Dad held out a piece of paper. I recognized it immediately. It was my first quarter report card. 1 B, 5 C's, and a D. So? I asked innocently. So this is your worst report card yet, Dad said, his face as hard as stone. Hey, I'm in 8th grade now, I said. Things are a lot harder. Plus, it's my first quarter. I still need time to adjust. No, what you need is to buckle down, put your nose to the grindstone, and stop listening to that awful music, Dad said sternly. I think it's rotting your brain. Rotting my brain? For an instant, I had an image of Grandma Rita, my dad's mom, in the nursing home shortly before she died. For years, she'd had what I used to think was called old-timer's disease, but what I later learned was actually Alzheimer's disease. The disease had eaten away her brain to the point where in the months before her death, she didn't recognize me, didn't recognize Dad, and didn't even know where she was. Seeing her cold, empty eyes staring off into space used to give me chills. Although she was still breathing, it was like she was already dead. Rock music hadn't done that to her, that's for sure. And it wasn't going to do that to me either. I'll do better next quarter, I promise, I said sincerely. I know you will, my father replied, because between now and then, no more music. What? I practically screamed. Just what I said, Dad stated calmly. All this time you spend listening to music is distracting you. You're 13 years old now. You're not a child anymore. You have to start taking life seriously. You can't take away my music, I said through clenched teeth. I could literally feel the rage boiling up inside me, ready to explode like an erupting volcano. It's for the best, Dad insisted. But my music is who I am, I insisted, tears now welling up in my eyes. It's part of me. It's in my bones. Well, your bones will have to do without it for a while, Dad said dismissively. At least until you're back to getting a B average. And that's the end of this discussion. With that, Dad turned and left the room. I stood there in shock for several seconds, like someone who'd just taken a bullet in the chest and was waiting for their brain to start registering the pain. Finally, the realization that my music was gone hit me in the face like a bag of wet sand, and I fell back onto my bed, shaking from head to toe. How could Dad do this to me? How could he take away my music? It was the one thing I loved, the one thing I truly loved. The last time I'd felt this bad was when my mother died from cancer 5 years ago. Since then, it was hard enough for me to find something that made me happy. Music had done that for me. It had brought me comfort, hope, and inspiration. It had given me a reason to live. And now Dad had taken that away from me. Just for the sake of some lousy junior high grades no one would even care about 10 years from now. I felt like I wanted to die. I just love Hunter Smith, Paula Lipton gushed. I know, Vera Panchek agreed, her eyes focused somewhere a million miles away. Sometimes I feel like he's singing just to me. The three of us were gathered in the grassy courtyard just outside of our school's cafeteria. It was lunch period, and with a good 10 minutes left before the start of our next classes, we'd gotten together to listen to Hunter's new album on my friend Paula's CD player. It was a little awkward passing the headphones from girl to girl, but having been denied music for days now, I appreciated any little taste I could get. "Hey, how about we go to your house after school and listen together?" Paula suggested to me. "Yeah, you've got the best stereo system in the city," Vera agreed. "Can't," I said sadly. "My dad still won't let me listen to music. He says it's rotting my brain." "What a jerk," said Paula. "I wouldn't let him get away with it." "Isn't that, child abuse?" Vera asked. "It's your constitutional right," Paula said. "Freedom of expression or something." "I'd sue him," Vera concurred. It was good having friends like Vera and Paula. When things got bad, like when my mom died, I could always count on them to support me. "I can't do that," I said, feeling somewhat helpless. And then it hit me. "But what I can do, Paula, is go to your house and listen. I'll just tell my dad I'm going with you to the library to study." "Sounds great," Paula said happily. Sometimes parents are so stupid." "You said it," I agreed. Already my mind was racing to concoct even more ways to get around my father's ridiculous new rule. I did spend that afternoon at Paula's house listening to the new Hunter Smith CD. It was his best album yet, and I couldn't wait to buy a copy of my own. I ran out that same evening and bought one at our local Mega Music Mart. With some babysitting money, I snuck my portable CD player into my backpack and listened to the music on bus, between classes, during study hall, and even during lunch. I don't think Dad had the slightest idea what I was doing. And even if he did, what could he have done to stop me? I was 13 years old. He couldn't watch me every minute of every day. Vera was right. Parents are pretty stupid. 2 weeks after my father had established his pathetic no music law, I was lying in bed trying to get to sleep, but I couldn't relax. I'd spent every free minute of that day secretly listening to my Hunter Smith CDs, and his music was echoing through my head like a radio that refused to be turned off. I shut my eyes and tried to relax. But all I could hear was Hunter's tough, beautiful voice soaring above the whine of his backup guitars and the gut-pounding rhythms of his drums. I imagined myself at one of his sold-out concerts, standing in the front row surrounded by hundreds of other wild, adoring fans. The spotlights were nearly blinding. I could feel the crowd pressing in around me and smell sweat hanging heavy in the air. And there was Hunter Smith, standing not 20 feet away from me. Dressed head to toe in leather, he gripped his microphone like a man clinging to a life preserver in heavy seas, holding on for dear life as he poured his heart and soul into his song. And he was singing to me, just to me. As I stood there, totally enraptured, he slowly walked towards me, his right arm outstretched, his eyes blazing blue, as he shared with me the most passionate music ever heard on this planet. I felt like I'd been lifted off the ground and transported to another plane. Never before had two souls connected this way. It was a kind of magic, the kind of magic that only music can create. Kawang! I bolted upright in my bed, startled by a blast of sound I couldn't identify. Was it a thunderclap? An earthquake? Had there been some kind of explosion? Right in my house? Kawang! There it was again. But this time I recognized the sound immediately as the ultra-amplified scream of a rock and roll guitar. Almost immediately my room shook with the low bass-enhanced thump, thump, thump of the rock band's percussion section. Then the air exploded with the combined sounds of electric keyboards, saxophones, and rhythm guitars. And above it all, soaring like an eagle on a mountain breeze, was the voice of Hunter Smith. I immediately glanced over at my digital alarm clock and saw that the time was 2:12 a.m. I struggled to focus my eyes and get my bearings. Who could be playing music at this hour? I wondered. The music felt like it was coming from right there in my bedroom. Thinking that my stereo had somehow turned itself on, I climbed out of bed and stumbled over to my bookshelf. The stereo was dark and cold. I put my hand over one of the speakers and felt nothing. This wasn't the source of the music. Next, I went to my window and yanked it open. If the music had been coming from another house or a passing car, it would have gotten even louder when I did this, but the volume remained the same, thunderously oppressive. "Who's playing that music?" I asked aloud. It wasn't that I didn't like it. Heck, it was Hunter Smith. But at 2 in the morning? Even to me, that seemed like a bit much. Now wide awake, I left my bedroom and headed downstairs to the first floor. I thought that perhaps my dad had learned that I'd violated his orders and that I'd been listening to music while away from home and cranked up the stereo in the family room just to teach me a lesson. But when I got to the den, the stereo there was cold as the one in my bedroom. So where was this music coming from? It didn't make any sense. No matter where I moved around the house, the volume never changed. It was like the music was following me everywhere I went. I hurried back upstairs in a panic and, without knocking, ran into my dad's room. "Huh? What is it?" Dad said, awakened by my entrance. "What's going on?" "It's that music!" I shouted over the scream of the guitars and the pounding drums. "It woke me up!" "What music?" Dad asked, his voice almost a whisper. "What do you mean, what music?" I asked in disbelief. The volume now seemed even louder, and I had put my hands over my ears just to hear myself think. "Gene, if this is some kind of joke," Dad began, obviously irritated. "You mean you really can't hear it?" I asked in amazement. I was so scared that tears were pouring from my eyes. "No," Dad said. "What do you hear?" "It's Hunter Smith!" I shouted, barely able to hear myself. "From his new CD! It sounds like I'm standing next to a 10,000-watt speaker! I can feel it thudding inside my whole body!" Just then, the awful realization hit me. The music, it was inside me. It was just like Dad told me last week. The music was a part of me. It was a part of my soul. It was in my bones. But unlike my stereo, my body didn't have an off button. "Help me," I pleaded, dropping to my knees. The music was even louder now. My ears hurt. My head felt like it was going to explode. "Turn it off! Please, Daddy! Make it go away!" Dad was on his feet now. He was saying something, but I could only see his lips move. His voice was completely drowned out by the music blasting through my head. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to shut it down by sheer force of will, but the music was far too powerful. It had taken over my body, or maybe I had allowed it to take it over. Whatever the cause was, there was nothing more I could do but let it sweep over me, to take me to another plane, another dimension, to a place of madness. Whew, that one made me think of my buddy Dan Wilder, who loves metal music and leather, and yeah. So that was a fun one. This edition is way different from the other ones, like very, very different from the other ones. I must say, extremely different. But I'm enjoying it. So let's see what you guys are saying in the chat, and then we'll hop out of here in a few. Once it loads, there we go. All right. Ray Cersei, ooh, interesting sound. Michelle Antisocial, this author, seriously. Right? Ray Cersei, gasp, "Dad!" "Last time I checked 13 as a child, but okay, Dad." "Oh, dude, this dad is mean. I maybe teared up just then." Aw. Tony Janot said, "Quang." "The music is in you." Ray Cersei said, "This is wild." Keith Tomlin said, "So no kids died. Bummer." I'm sorry we let you down on that one, Keith. But man, this author, Alan B. Urey, his stories are very different from the other ones, and I'm liking it. I mean, it makes sense. Once you've gotten to Scary Stories for Sleepovers number 9, I mean, you got to try something new. You can't just do the same thing over and over again. Ray Cersei said, "These ones are intense." I agree. They're so fun and so intense that I am very excited because next Wednesday we will read the remainder of the book. And I thank you all for joining me. I thank you all so much for your generous tips. They are hugely appreciated. They will be turned into both dog food and hamburger helper. I won't actually buy any hamburger helper, although I did have hamburger helper for dinner today out of sheer curiosity and nostalgia. And it was fine. But thank you guys for joining me. I hope you had a great time. I did. And thank you guys. This is the 7th week, I believe, that we've been doing this. I think it's the 6th or 7th week. I'm not sure off the top of my head. But we've been doing it for almost 2 months. It's been an awesome way to give my week a little bit of excitement and give me something to look forward to. I hope it's done the same for you to some extent, giving you somewhere to be, something to do. Thank you guys. I hope everyone watching is well. You're doing well. You're healthy. Your friends and family are the same. Thank you all so much. David said I had leftover Mexican for dinner. You would. There was a lot of Mexican food left over from Cinco de Mayo. Um, and Keith Tomlin said probably my favorite book so far. I would agree. Ray Cersei said thanks for reading, and thank you for listening, Ray. You've been here almost every single week, I think, if not every single week. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I'll see you guys next Wednesday right here on Facebook. So, until then, I'm going to go and let Henwolf sleep peacefully. So, good night, guys. That was fun.